Okay, we've got a few people who are ready to go. Corey is like, it's easy to move because Cindy's already done all the work. Cindy's like, it's not easy to move. I'm working all the time. Right. It's not easy to move. These people had been settled. They weren't living in tents, to be sure, but they had been settled for months in one location. They weren't really prepared to move, I don't think. And then when they moved, they didn't throw everything into a moving vehicle and then hop into their cars and travel to the next place. They had to carry everything with them, whether it was on their own backs or on the backs of beasts of burden. And so in chapter 10, we have an account of their journey by stages from point A to point B. And the points aren't actually important in this case. But when we get to chapter 11, what do? They complain. And if you have a Bible there with headings, you see that. It probably just says at the top of chapter 11, the people complain, right? And we looked at chapter 11 over the last few weeks and noticed a number of things about why the people complain, but I want us to understand, I'm going to guess I would have complained too. And you probably would have as well. God has provided for them, but they're not in circumstances which they find it easy to live in. And that's how this is real to us, because we're not always in circumstances in which we find it easy to live. Perhaps it's our surroundings, the house that we're living in, the car that we're driving, the job that we have to work at. Perhaps it's the people. Perhaps we're struggling with our relationships. A lot of different things can be happening to make it difficult for us to handle the circumstances of our lives. And so in chapter 11, the people of Israel have a number of things that happen to them and around them, which illustrate the process of discontent as it comes out in the human existence. And we concluded over the last few weeks that discontent with the circumstances that God has brought into our lives is a kind of unfaith. It's a lack of faith. And when we respond with a complaining heart, when the subtext of our mind isn't, God, I need to trust you, I need to depend on you, and I know that you will provide for me, but instead we complain in our head, or it comes out of our mouths as it so often does, we are evidencing a lack of faith in God. And so in chapter 11, we have this account of the people complaining and how it is that God removes them from that spirit of complaining. Numbers chapter 12 is all about politics. Don't you guys love politics? Talking about politics, listening to politics on the news, reading articles. No. We're not even really very far into the election cycle, and I'm already exhausted by all of it. Don't like talking about politics. Well, this is a different kind of politics that we have here. But in short, Moses is the leader of the people of Israel. God has made that very clear. But Moses' older brother and sister, they're older than him. Quite a few years older than him, most likely. Aaron and Miriam make a play for more power as compared to Moses in this chapter. And what I hope that we can do as we look at this is I hope that we can see how it is that people interact with one another and feel like they deserve something better or that someone else doesn't deserve what they have. A lot of times we're making a lot of comparisons and we're looking at one another unfavorably and critical in our hearts. And I hope that as we look at this passage this morning, we will be able to reorient the way that we think about others and about their value before God, because that's the most important thing about all of us. What is it that makes a person valuable? By what measurement do you and I assign significance to others? I think this is important, for the significance that we assign to others will greatly influence how we treat that person. Culture plays a lot of games along these lines. A comparison game is probably the most popular way that this is done. Is everyone the same? Well, of course not. Not everyone is the same. Does everyone have the same abilities? No, of course not. There are some things that I can do that you cannot. There are some things that you can do that I cannot. We are not all the same. I think it is safe to say, however, that everyone has the same moral value. Everyone is equally valuable to every other person. There is no person here who is more valuable or less valuable than any other person here in the eyes of God. God has created all of us and has loved all of us and sent his Son, Jesus Christ, to die for all of us. And that is the thing which assigns significance and value to us. Now, does this mean that everyone has the same amount of ability, the same capacity? Well, of course not. There are some people here in this room who are very talented in a number of areas. And it just looks like whenever they pick something up, very shortly, they can do it. They have ability. They have capacity. There are other people in this room who look at those people and say, how are they even like that? I feel like I barely get up in the morning. And I barely stumble around the house. And I barely drink my coffee without dribbling it down my chin. We are not all the same, though we all have the same value. But when we look at a person, we tend to assign significance to their capacity to do good to us, instead of simply looking at them and saying, that is another child of God. That is a person that God created, that God loved, that Jesus Christ died for. And I think that we need to be careful how we approach this. If we assign value to a person because of the resources that we need that they have, because of the abilities that they have, which we need in our lives, or which we admire and we wish we had. If we assign significance to a person simply because of their personal beauty, if we assign significance to a person because they make us feel good about ourselves, or when we are around them, we feel more stable. If we assign significance to a person because they give us attention, because they make us feel loved, then we are beginning on shaky ground. Now, I'm saying that we are only beginning on shaky ground because there are certain relationships in which those things are absolutely necessary. The relationship between a husband and wife, between parents and children, all those things that I just talked about, the need of resources, the need of abilities, the stability, the admiration, and the love that we need from one another are normal and appropriate and necessary in some relationships. Nevertheless, we must be careful not to attach significance to a person because of their capacity, because of the talents, the abilities that they have. Capacity has almost nothing to do with character. And it is a person's character that is the foundation of our evaluation. Often a person with high capacity has an inverse relationship to their character. A person that can pick up anything, who can do anything, and anything's easy, has rarely had to struggle, has rarely been forced to do things the hard way. And it is the struggle and the doing things the hard way that most often produces character. Character, not capacity, is also the most significant measurement of a person's usefulness to the Lord. A person who perceives that they have low capacity and uses that as an excuse to not do much has missed the point. A person who has high capacity and wants everyone to recognize their talent and ability and to put them in a position of power and authority and leadership has also missed the point. Both pride and unbelief are sins in God's sight. So how do we approach this issue, this struggle, whether I'm a person with high capacity and arrogant because of it, or I'm a person who perceives that I have low capacity and I use it as an excuse to not do anything, or I am looking at others and judging them based on their capacity instead of their character? How do we handle this in our own lives? Numbers 12, I think, gives an interesting account of people approaching one another in the wrong ways in this example. And I think we can learn from the character of the three individuals involved in this event. So let's read the chapter here. Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because the Cushite woman whom he had married, for he had married a Cushite woman. And they said, "Has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us also?" And the Lord heard it. I want to pause there. Doesn't God hear everything? Right. If we go back to chapter 11, verse 1, we see, and the people complained in the hearing of the Lord. There's a distinction that's being made here by Moses as he records these events in the book of Numbers. And it's not that God hears some things and doesn't hear other things, but rather that we, because of the way that we say or do a thing, call God's attention to us on a higher level. The people of Israel did this with a great deal of regularity. And I think most often when we see and the Lord heard it, it's because things are being done with a very great lack of faith, or things are being done in a way that flies in the face of God's authority and God's provision. There are a number of other places, and we won't go there this morning for time's sake, but I'll just mention briefly where the people of Israel tested God. They more or less said, God, you've provided for us in the past, but are you going to provide for us now? That is what happens in chapter 11, for instance, and happens in a number of other places. And God always responds negatively to those manipulative type of tactics. So here we have we have Aaron and Miriam calling God's attention to themselves because they are challenging God's will. And the Lord heard it unfavorably. Now, the man Moses was very meek, more than all the people who were on the face of the earth. And suddenly the Lord said to Moses and to Aaron and Miriam, come out, you three, to the tent of meeting. And the three of them came out, and the Lord came down in a pillar of cloud and stood at the entrance of the tent, and called Aaron and Miriam, and they both came forward, and he said, hear my words. If there is a prophet among you, and I, the Lord myself, make known to him in a vision, I speak to him in a dream. Not so with my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my house. With him I speak mouth to mouth, or face to face, clearly, not in riddles. And he beholds the form of the Lord. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? And the anger of the Lord was kindled against them, and he departed. When the cloud removed from over the tent, behold, Miriam was leprous, like snow. And Aaron turned toward Miriam, and behold, she was leprous. And Aaron said to Moses, my Lord, do not punish us, because we have done foolishly and have sinned. Let her not be as one dead, whose flesh is half eaten away when he comes out of his mother's womb. And Moses cried to the Lord, O God, please heal her, please. And the Lord said to Moses, if her father had but spit in her face, should she not be shamed 7 days? Let her be shut outside the camp 7 days, and after that she may be brought in again. So Miriam was shut outside the camp 7 days, and the people did not set out again on the march until Miriam was brought in again. After that the people set out from Hazeroth and camped in the wilderness of Paran. What's going on here? Well, like I hinted at earlier, this is politics. What I'd like to do this morning is we're not going to have the usual outline. Those of you who are used to Roman numeral 1, letter A, letter B, etc. What I'd like to do is I'm just going to very briefly go through the passage and describe some of the interesting features, some of the details of what's going on here. And then I want to look at the character of Moses, the character of Miriam, and the character of Aaron. And just do a brief character study of these three individuals in hopes that we will identify things in them that are true in us that hopefully will give us an opportunity to turn from wrong to right. And also maybe we'll be able to identify things in ourselves that are right. And we'll be able to recognize them and thank the Lord for them. We have in verse 1, Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses. This is a sentence structure which is a little unusual in the Hebrew. Normally it would be Aaron and Miriam, simply because of the way that they would normally list things. But what's going on here is we have a female ending on the word, which makes it clear that Miriam was sort of the instigator. She was the one who was pushing for this most. And that's why her name gets mentioned first in the English translation. Miriam was the instigator, Aaron was the follower. And Aaron had a pattern of this. He was willing to follow people. He wasn't a leader. This happened also not too many months before when Moses was up on the mountain receiving the law. And the people are like, Moses is God, he's dead. We need a God to worship. And they said, well, how are we going to do this? And Aaron said, well, bring me lots of gold. I'll make a golden calf for you to worship. He was a follower. He was someone who would listen to the suggestions of others and have a hard time reflecting on the morality of a situation and providing stable leadership. So Aaron here has a pattern of this. It's something he does. The The contest here is one of authority, one of power in the eyes of the people, between Aaron and Moses, between Miriam and Moses. We have Aaron, who is high priest, the highest position in the land that's going to last, that's going to be hereditary. But Moses is the prophet. I almost called him the high prophet. He's not the high prophet, but he is the prophet. He is the man that God is using to deliver a method of life to his people. Both of them are mediators between God and his people, but Moses is clearly the one who has God's ear, the one who God goes to all the time. And so there is a power struggle here in the perception of the people. Now their complaint in verse 2 is very uncharitable. They said, has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? At the end of verse 1. They spoke against Moses because of the Cushite woman whom he had married, for he had married a Cushite woman. Now what's going on here again is politics. If you recall from Numbers chapter 11, the complaining that is in Numbers chapter 11 started in the fringes of the camp. That is, the people who were not Hebrew. There was a great multitude of people who left Egypt with the Hebrew people, but they were not Hebrews, so they weren't in the camp. They were scattered around the outer edges of the camp. And that's where the problem originated. Now, the people of Israel, the problem originated in the outskirts, but it very quickly metastasized into the inside. And they were infected with the same sin, with the same evil unbelief. But here we have Moses' wife, and she's an outsider. I think she lived with Moses in the camp, no doubt about it, but she is clearly not Hebrew-looking. And so they use the events of Numbers chapter 11, which originated with foreigners, to say, look, Moses' wife is a foreigner too. He shouldn't have the political power. He shouldn't have the authority that he has. We're prophets too. God has spoken through us too. So they begin this attack with in a political power play. She can't be trusted, and if she can't be trusted, Moses can't be trusted. You guys need to follow us, not him. But Zipporah, Moses' wife for these many years, though she was not a Hebrew, did identify with the Hebrew people. She had married a Hebrew man. In fact, she was married to the Hebrew man, the ultimate Hebrew, Moses, the deliverer of the law. Their marriage was before, probably decades before, the laws about intermarriage with foreigners were given. And she had circumcised her son. She remained with her husband when she could have returned to the Midianites. So their accusation against Zipporah, I think, was just a smokescreen. It was political posturing to bring about a result that they wanted. The real reason, of course, is in verse 2 when they say, has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not also spoken through us? They want more of Moses' power and authority. But then we have that deep sort of a phrase. Then the Lord heard it. Now what's really interesting here is that we understand that Moses was the author of the Pentateuch. He was the one who supervised its composition and wrote most of its contents. I say that because there are lots of lists in the book of Numbers especially that were probably prepared by scribes and presented to Moses, and then Moses included them in there. He didn't have time for all of that, being the leader of this massive crowd of people. But we have this parenthetical expression in verse 3, which is really interesting. It says, now the man Moses was very meek, more than all the people who were on the face of the earth. I don't know if Moses wrote this about himself, but imagine with me that you are Moses. Now this is going to be really difficult because you have to make yourself probably 82, 83 years old, and there's only a few of you in here that are around that age. Okay, that's how old Moses was at these events. He was still physically very strong and able. He wasn't feeling his age. He lived to be about 140. 120. But he's an old and experienced man. Long years of experience and wisdom. So imagine yourself that, if you can. All right? Now, this also says that Moses was the meekest man that anyone could find. What does meek mean in this context? Well, he didn't have a high opinion of himself. So, you're a long experienced man with power and authority who has been in the presence of God and heard his voice. But you are meek somehow. I can't imagine how that worked out for Moses. I don't think it would have worked out that way for me. But he remained meek. He remained humble. At God's disposal, not obsessed with himself. If you are a meek man and your older brother and sister come and say, you shouldn't have married that woman all those years ago, and it actually means that you shouldn't have as much power and authority, how would you respond being a meek man? I don't know. But my guess is that a meek person immediately says, well, maybe I'm going to go check with God. Moses was not obsessed with his rights. He wasn't playing the comparison game with the people who were playing it against him. A meek man would listen to objections, maybe see reason in them, and begin to consider. A meek man would also turn to the Lord with his questions and his concerns. In verse 4, suddenly the Lord said to Moses and Aaron and Miriam, come out, you three, to the tent of meeting. And the three of them came out, and the Lord came down in a pillar of cloud and stood at the entrance of the tent and called for Aaron and Miriam. And they both came forward. This is scary. God doesn't do this with any regularity. We have a political move made behind a really nasty smokescreen. Moses' wife, she isn't one of us. And that makes Moses not one of us. And besides, we're prophets too. You should follow us, not him. Okay? That's what's going on here. It's low. It's politics. It's really, really foolish. And so God comes down. And he comes in this presence of kind of a whirlwind. I don't know if there was fire in it. A pillar of cloud, at least, stood at the entrance of the tent. And he calls them to that. How would your heart be thumping if that was you? I mean, almost as soon as the words left their mouths, I'm certain they were thinking, this is not going to turn out well. We shouldn't have done this. This was all kinds of foolishness. Let me suggest, in the character of Miriam and Aaron, we have pride, we have jealousy, and let me tell you, pride and jealousy will get you to do all kinds of stupid things. All right? Pride and jealousy will get me to do all kinds of stupid things. Let us not have a comparing thing going on here. Let us not judge people by comparing our capacity with their capacity and saying, oh, I'm better than them. This will not work out for us. Just practically speaking, in the world that God has built, pride and jealousy lead to foolishness, not to goodness in our own lives, even as it happened here to Miriam and Aaron. Verses 6 and 7 are a little Hebrew poem from God. God said, hear my words. If there is a prophet among you, I, the Lord myself, will make him known to him in a vision. I will speak to him in a dream. Not so with my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my house. With him I speak mouth to mouth clearly and not in riddles, and he beholds the form of the Lord. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? This little Hebrew poem doesn't come across in English at all because Hebrews use parallelism, not rhyme. We use rhyme and parallelism and meter. The Hebrews were very much focused on the parallelism in their poetry. And without getting into the weeds, the center of this little poem is verse 7. Not so with my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my house. This poem leads to Moses and says, this is the man. No one else. There's no one else like him right now. This is the man. You should be listening to him. You should not be challenging him. He is unique. He is special. He has seen me. He is my faithful servant. No one challenge the authority of Moses again. Don't do it. All right? That's what this poem is leading to. It points directly to that conclusion. This distinction of the uniqueness and the ascendance of Moses as a prophet of the Lord is something that shows up in the Bible over and over again. And I had a whole little section, but we're running out of time, so I'm going to summarize it instead of going into the weeds here. But Moses is a kind of precursor of Christ. In the book of Deuteronomy, in a number of instances, he says, there is another prophet coming who will be like me. And what that leads us to conclude is that all the prophets that came after Moses until Jesus Christ, they were of the Miriam-Aaron kind. The kind where God would come to them in a vision, he would speak to them in riddles. And if you read prophetic literature like the book of Daniel, you'd be like, oh yeah, that stuff's hard to understand and it's hard to explain. And sometimes you only get it after the events have happened, right? With Moses, God spoke face to face. And the next prophet that comes with a relationship of God like that is Jesus Christ. So Moses is the prophet, the one that is giving us a hint of what the God-man is going to be like. Moses holds a special place. And because of their unbelief, verse 9, the anger of the Lord was kindled against them, and he departed. The anger of the Lord was kindled, just like in chapter 11, verse 1. And because of what had happened, Miriam received leprosy, and she was disqualified for participation in the congregation of Israel. Leprosy was, you get kicked out. You can't be here. It's too dangerous for you to be here. You can't be here. You have to live a long ways away from the rest of us. A heavy sentence. God cut her off from among her people. Verses 11 and 12, Aaron humbles himself and requests Moses' intercession. He even calls Moses Lord. And so Moses, being a kind and forgiving man who loves his family, he says to God, did you see that? Oh God, please heal her. Please. There's I don't know if I want to use the word pathetic because it has negative connotations, but in its core idea, it's a pathetic appeal. It is God from the very center of my being. Please heal her. Please restore her. It's an interesting pattern in God's word that only the wronged one may help those who wrong them. Jesus Christ, we wrong him with our sin, and yet his sacrifice is the thing which gives us great benefit. It runs against and contrary to our overinflated sense of self-justice that the ones who wrong us are the ones that we must be forgiving and helping. Verses 14 and 15, she has to bear her shame like a rebellious daughter. When a father would spit in his daughter's face, it was a sign that she had crossed a line in her rebellion. And there was actually penalties for that. And Miriam is told to go through the process of being restored. But after this, she is restored. Her leprosy is healed, and she is able to return to the camp. And then, of course, in verse 16, we have a brief account of a little more of their travels. So, that's the passage. That's the story. It's politics. It's people playing this game to try to get ascendancy and authority and power over one another. And this sort of game, it happens in the workplace. It happens in national politics. It happens in the home. It happens in churches. And in our home and in our church, it should not be happening. We should not be deploying these kind of tactics. We are brothers and sisters in Christ, and we ought to be supporting one another. So let's look at these character sketches. First, Miriam. What do we know about her from this passage? Well, she was greedy for recognition. She wanted people to look at her and be impressed. She was greedy for authority. She wanted people to hear her and be obedient. She was jealous of Zipporah. Not because she wanted to be her brother's wife, but because she thought that she shouldn't be there. In all, petty, ascribing value to those things which are valueless, and because of her pride and jealousy, revealing herself as foolish. connecting value to capacity instead of character. Brothers and sisters, we can get like this. Especially when we're playing that comparison game. Especially when someone rubs us the wrong way and we just want to make sure everyone understands how nasty that person is. And so we tell the truth about them. I wasn't pointing at anyone specific over there. Shelley smiled when I pointed that direction. So I wasn't pointing at anyone particular over there. I could have pointed over here. We get like that. Sometimes it stays in the subtext. Sometimes it doesn't come out of our mouths, and we just rehash that conversation over and over again, and so we can't go to sleep at night. Right? Some of you are like, yeah, I do that. Some of you are like, no, I just go to sleep. No problem. But we rehash that conversation over and over and over again in our head, and we win it, and then we win it this way, and then we win it that way, and we're like, yes, oh wait, it didn't actually happen that way. If that's the subtext, if that's what's going on up there, then there's something ill with your heart. Your character, not their character, ought to be your primary concern at that point. Take the time to turn that over and speak to the Lord of your misplaced values, not putting value on character, but instead on a sense of personal justice. This isn't right, but this is doing what Miriam did, and we need to avoid that because that is not the behavior of someone who has God's approval. What about Aaron's character? Well, he was a follower into all kinds of catastrophic error. He followed Miriam instead of encouraging her to go in the right direction. And at the end of the day, Miriam had leprosy. He followed the people of Israel demanding a god, and he made them a golden calf. That didn't work out for many people who died as a consequence of that idolatry. Aaron was a follower, not a leader. He was a man with power and authority who did not use that power and authority to point people to God. How do we get like this? Well, for some of us, it's because we want everyone to like us. There are some people in here, and I am sometimes like this. I'm not always like this, but I'm sometimes like this, who don't want conflict. I'd rather just give in than stand for the truth sometimes. It's easier to just stay quiet and let it pass. Aaron was like that, and because of that, he compromised when he should have confronted. Confrontation is not always in your face, acerbic, unkind. It should never be unkind. Confrontation can be the last thing that I needed from you before I sinned, and you could have stopped me, and vice versa. And that's what Aaron could have been doing in the circumstances we've been talking about this morning. Instead, he was compliant. Aaron was a follower, and that follower caused other people to be led into catastrophic error. But he was quick to repent. When the consequences came down, he's like, I don't like these consequences. Moses, help. God, help. I want to change.